This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
Dusk settled over Victorian London, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. The gas lamps flickered to life, their warm glow a stark contrast to the chilly evening air. Mr. Gabriel John Utterson, a well-respected lawyer known for his unwavering loyalty, stepped out of his office, his breath visible in the crisp atmosphere. The city was winding down, a symphony of closing shutters and distant carriage wheels. Shopkeepers bid farewell to the last customers of the day, their voices a mix of weariness and relief. Utterson's footsteps echoed on the pavement, a steady rhythm in the quieting streets. As he rounded the corner, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. Richard Enfield, Utterson's distant cousin and lifelong friend, fell into step beside him. The two men walked in companionable silence, their weekly ritual as comforting as a warm hearth on a cold night. They turned onto a busier street, the air thick with the scent of coal smoke and damp stone. Suddenly, Enfield's pace slowed, his eyes fixed on a particular spot. "Utterson," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "do you see that street corner there? Something quite unsettling happened there a few months ago." Utterson felt a prickle of unease run down his spine. "Oh," he prompted, curiosity overriding his usual reserve. Enfield's face darkened, the flickering lamplight casting deep shadows across his features. "It was a man named Edward Hyde," he began, his voice dripping with disgust. "Never have I seen a person who looked so sinister. Short in the stature, but there was something about him, a sense of deformity, though I couldn't point to any specific malformation." As Enfield spoke, the bustling street seemed to fade away. In its place, Utterson could almost see the scene unfolding, a nightmare brought to life in the heart of London. A young girl, no more than 8 or 10, was running across the street. Out of nowhere, this Hyde character collided with her. Enfield's fist clenched, his knuckles white. But instead of helping her up, he trampled over her. Utterson left her screaming on the ground as if she were nothing more than a piece of rubbish. Utterson felt his stomach turn. The chill in the air seemed to seep into his very bones. "Good God," he murmured, his mind reeling at the cruelty described. "It caused quite a stir, as you can imagine," Enfield continued, his eyes distant. The girl's family and other bystanders quickly gathered. They were ready to tear Hyde limb from limb, and I can't say I would have stopped them. But here's the strange part. Instead of running, Hyde agreed to pay compensation. Enfield's gaze darted to a nearby building, its windows dark and uninviting. He disappeared into that building there and returned with a check for $100. A princely sum, to be sure, but that's not what caught my attention. The check was signed by a man of high standing in our community, a name I'm sure you'd recognize. Utterson leaned in, his heart pounding. "And who might that be?" Enfield shook his head, his expression torn between loyalty and disgust. "I'd rather not say, out of respect, but I assure you, it's someone above reproach." As they continued their walk, the gas lamps seemed to flicker more urgently, as if trying to shed light on the mystery. Utterson's mind raced, piecing together fragments of information. He couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more about this story than Enfield realized. The name on that check, could it be his old friend and client, Dr. Henry Jekyll? Jekyll was a brilliant scientist, a philanthropist, a man of impeccable character. What connection could he possibly have to this despicable Mr. Hyde? The contrast was as stark as the shadows and light playing across the cobblestones beneath their feet. Utterson's legal mind began to whir, the pieces of the puzzle refusing to fit together. There had to be more to this story, some explanation that would make sense of this bizarre connection. As the two men parted ways for the evening, the lawyer knew that his curiosity would not let him rest until he uncovered the truth. He made his way home, the gas lamps casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance with the secrets of the city. The mystery of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde had taken root in his mind, a seed of doubt growing with each step. As Utterson reached his front door, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the nearest lamp, plunging him into darkness. In that moment, a chill ran through him that had nothing to do with the night air. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong with his old friend, Dr. Jekyll. The change in him had been subtle at first, but now Utterson couldn't ignore the nagging worry that had taken hold. What dark secret was Jekyll hiding, and how was it connected to the monstrous Mr. Hyde? Gabriel Utterson's concern grew with each passing day. He couldn't shake the memory of a recent change in Dr. Jekyll's will, which he had reluctantly drawn up at his friend's insistence. The new document, penned in Jekyll's own hand, sent a chill down Utterson's spine every time he recalled its contents. It stipulated that in the event of Jekyll's death or unexplained disappearance for more than 3 months, all his possessions should be transferred to a man named Edward Hyde. The lawyer's study was bathed in the warm glow of a single oil lamp, casting long shadows across the room. Utterson paced back and forth, his footsteps echoing on the creaking floorboards. The rhythmic sound matched the pounding of his heart as his mind raced with possibilities. Who was this Edward Hyde? The name hung in the air like a foul odor, refusing to dissipate. Utterson's imagination conjured images of a cunning manipulator, a spider spinning a web of deceit around his dear friend Jekyll. He could almost see the threads of this web, glistening in the lamplight, stretching out to ensnare his colleague. The thought made his stomach churn. Could Jekyll be falling victim to blackmail? Or perhaps some other nefarious scheme? The possibilities swirled in Utterson's mind like a dark whirlpool, threatening to pull him under. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog of worry that clouded his thoughts. With a determined set to his jaw, Utterson donned his coat and hat. The fabric felt heavy on his shoulders, as if weighted down by the burden of his concerns. He stepped out into the foggy London streets, the damp air clinging to his skin like a second coat. The city was a maze of shadows and mist, gas lamps casting eerie halos in the gloom. Utterson's destination loomed before him, the grand house of Dr. Hasty Lanyon, another mutual friend and fellow physician. The building stood like a sentinel in the night, its windows dark save for a single light in the study. Lanyon greeted him with a weary smile, the lines on his face deepened by the flickering candlelight. "Utterson, old friend," he said, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "What brings you here at this late hour?" As they settled into worn leather chairs, the rich scent of tobacco and old books filling the air, Utterson broached the subject of Jekyll. To his surprise, Lanyon's face darkened, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. "Jekyll," Lanyon spat the name, as if it left a bitter taste in his mouth. "We were close once, but no longer. His pursuits have taken a turn towards the absurd, the dangerous." Utterson leaned forward, his heart racing. "What do you mean, Hasty?" "Unscientific balderdash," Lanyon replied, his voice a mix of disgust and disappointment. "Extreme theories that fly in the face of all we know to be true. I fear for his reputation, Utterson. I truly do." The words hung heavy in the air, each one a stone dropping into the pit of Utterson's stomach. Despite this rift, Lanyon knew nothing of Edward Hyde. The mystery deepened, like a fog rolling in from the Thames, obscuring all in its path. Utterson left Lanyon's house with more questions than answers, his unease intensifying with each step. The streets of London seemed to close in around him, the gas lamps casting long shadows that danced and twisted like living things. A resolve hardened within him, as unyielding as the cobblestones beneath his feet. He would meet this mysterious Mr. Hyde in person, no matter the cost. Night after night, Utterson haunted the street where Hyde was first seen. The lawyer became a fixture in the shadowy corners, his eyes scanning every face that passed. The air was thick with the scent of coal smoke and desperation, a fitting backdrop for his vigil. Days turned to weeks, and still Hyde eluded him. Utterson's determination, however, never wavered. It was as if he were locked in a game of cat and mouse with a phantom, always one step behind. Then on a night when the moon hung low and bloated in the sky, it happened. A small, oddly shaped figure emerged from the shadows, moving with a quick, furtive gait. Utterson's heart leapt into his throat. "Mr. Hyde, I presume?" he called out, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. The figure turned, and Utterson found himself face to face with Edward Hyde. The lawyer's breath caught in his throat as he took in the man's appearance. There was something about Hyde's face, something that defied description yet inspired an instinctive revulsion. It wasn't that Hyde was visibly deformed. No, it was something more insidious, as if his very essence was twisted and wrong. Utterson's mind recoiled from the sight, even as he forced himself to maintain eye contact. Their interaction was brief and tense, like two predators circling each other. Hyde's words were clipped, his manner brusque to the point of rudeness. As quickly as he had appeared, he melted back into the shadows, leaving Utterson standing alone on the empty street. The encounter left Utterson more troubled than ever. The thought of Jekyll's involvement with such a disagreeable character sent a shudder through him. As he made his way home, the lawyer's mind was awash with dark possibilities. One thing was certain: he would not rest until he had uncovered the truth. For Jekyll's sake, and for his own peace of mind, Utterson vowed to delve deeper into this mystery, no matter where it might lead him. As he reached his front door, a sudden realization struck him like a physical blow. The key to unraveling this enigma lay not just in Hyde, but in Jekyll himself. With trembling hands, Utterson unlocked his door, his mind already racing with plans for the next day. Little did he know, the answers he sought would shake the very foundations of his world. Utterson's mind was consumed by an unrelenting worry. He couldn't shake the nagging concerns that plagued his thoughts day and night. The weight of his suspicions pressed down on him like a physical burden, driving him to action. With a deep breath and steely resolve, he decided to confront Dr. Jekyll directly about his association with Edward Hyde. The lawyer's footsteps echoed hollowly on the cobblestone streets as he made his way through the murky London evening. A thick, oppressive fog had settled over the city, wrapping around him like a damp, chilling blanket. It muffled sounds and blurred the edges of buildings, creating an eerie, dreamlike quality to the familiar streets. As Utterson approached Jekyll's residence, the doctor's home loomed before him, a grand, imposing structure that seemed to hold secrets within its very bricks. The fog swirled around its base as if trying to conceal whatever mysteries lay within. Utterson's eyes were drawn to a curious addition, a detached laboratory building that stood apart from the main house. It crouched in the mist like a brooding sentinel, its windows dark and uninviting. The sight of it sent an involuntary shiver down his spine, though he couldn't quite explain why. With a deep breath to steady his nerves, Utterson rapped on the heavy wooden door. The sound reverberated through the quiet street, seeming unnaturally loud in the muffled atmosphere. After a moment, Poole, Jekyll's loyal butler, answered. His face was as impassive as stone, betraying nothing of what might be occurring within the house. "I'm afraid the doctor is out, sir," Poole said, his voice tinged with a hint of something Utterson couldn't quite place. Was it concern, suspicion, or perhaps a touch of fear? But Utterson was not to be deterred. His jaw set with determination as he replied, "I'll wait." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. Poole hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting briefly to the side as if seeking guidance from an unseen source. Then, with obvious reluctance, he ushered Utterson into the study. The room was a reflection of Jekyll himself, refined, scholarly, with an air of genteel comfort. Rich leather-bound books lined the walls, and a fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the room. Yet as Utterson's eyes roamed over the familiar surroundings, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The shadows seemed deeper, more menacing. The silence felt oppressive, as if the very air was holding its breath in anticipation of some terrible revelation. Time crawled by like molasses, each tick of the ornate clock on the mantel stretching into eternity. Utterson paced the room, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. His mind raced with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Just as his patience was beginning to wear thin, the door swung open with a sudden creak that made him start. Dr. Jekyll strode into the room, and for a moment Utterson felt a wave of relief wash over him. At first glance, Jekyll appeared his usual self, warm, friendly, his face creased with a welcoming smile. "My dear Utterson," he exclaimed, clasping the lawyer's hand with enthusiasm. "What a pleasant surprise." But as Utterson broached the subject of the will and Edward Hyde, the change in Jekyll was as sudden and stark as a summer storm. The doctor's smile faltered, the corners of his mouth twitching downward. His eyes, usually so clear and intelligent, now darted about the room like those of a cornered animal. The cheerful facade cracked, revealing glimpses of something darker underneath. "It's nothing to worry about, old friend," Jekyll insisted, his words tumbling out in a rush. His hands, usually so steady and sure, now fluttered nervously as he spoke. "I understand the situation perfectly. Hyde, he's not what you think. I can be rid of him at any moment, I assure you." Utterson watched as Jekyll's hands trembled slightly, belying the confidence of his words. The doctor's behavior was erratic, swinging between forced joviality and nervous agitation like a pendulum gone mad. One moment he would lean in close, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. The next, he would pull away, pacing the room with quick, jerky steps. "Please, Utterson," Jekyll pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. He gripped the lawyer's arm with surprising strength, his eyes wide and imploring. "Drop this matter. It's far more complex than you can understand." His gaze held a haunted look that sent a chill through Utterson's very soul. As Jekyll continued to speak, assuring Utterson of Hyde's trustworthiness and begging him to ensure the inheritance should anything happen, the lawyer felt a growing sense of unease. It was as if he were watching his friend balance on the edge of a precipice, teetering between safety and an unfathomable abyss. Every instinct screamed at him to reach out, to pull Jekyll back from whatever danger threatened to engulf him. When at last Utterson took his leave, the fog outside seemed to have seeped into his very bones. The damp chill made him shiver, but it was nothing compared to the icy tendrils of fear that had taken root in his heart. He couldn't reconcile the Jekyll he knew, kind, respected, a pillar of scientific achievement, with this nervous, secretive man who seemed to be under the thrall of the mysterious and unsavory Hyde. As he walked away from the house, each step heavy with the weight of his concerns, Utterson made a silent vow. He would keep a closer eye on both Jekyll and Hyde, driven by a loyalty that ran as deep as the Thames itself. Whatever danger his friend might be in, whatever influence Hyde held over him, Utterson was determined to uncover the truth. The lawyer disappeared into the misty London night, his mind churning with questions and his heart heavy with worry. The investigation, he knew, was far from over. The strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde had only just begun to unfold, its mysteries as thick and impenetrable as the fog that blanketed the city. As Utterson made his way home, he couldn't shake the feeling that something momentous was about to occur. The city had enjoyed nearly a year of peace and tranquility, but there was a tension in the air, a sense of impending doom that seemed to whisper through the fog-shrouded streets. Little did he know that on this very night, London's calm was about to be shattered in a way that would leave an indelible mark on its history, and on the lives of all those involved in this strange and terrible affair. London had enjoyed nearly a year of peace and tranquility, but on a foggy night, the city's calm was about to be shattered in a way that would leave an indelible mark on its history. The full moon hung low in the sky, a pale orb barely visible through the thick, soupy fog that blanketed the streets. Its ghostly light seeped through curtains, casting eerie shadows and robbing many of their sleep. In one such home, a maid tossed and turned, her restless mind mirroring the unsettling atmosphere outside. Suddenly, a commotion from the street below pierced the night silence. The maid, driven by curiosity and unease, crept to her window. As she peered out into the misty gloom, her breath caught in her throat, and her heart began to race. There, illuminated by the moon's spectral glow, stood a figure she recognized with a jolt of fear. Mr. Hyde. His hunched form loomed over an elderly gentleman, his face twisted into a mask of savage fury. In his hands he gripped a heavy cane, wielding it like a primitive club. The maid's eyes widened in horror as she watched the scene unfold. With a sickening crack that seemed to echo through the fog-muffled street, Hyde brought the cane down on the old man's skull. The victim crumpled to the ground, but Hyde's assault didn't stop. Again and again, he raised the cane and brought it crashing down, each blow punctuated by a grunt of exertion and what chillingly sounded like pleasure. The old man's body jerked with each impact, like a broken marionette in the hands of a cruel puppeteer. The maid's scream tore through the night, shattering the eerie silence and jolting the neighborhood awake. Lights flickered on in nearby houses, and doors burst open as neighbors rushed to investigate. But Hyde, quick as a shadow and silent as death, melted into the fog. He vanished, leaving behind only the broken body of his victim and the echoes of the maid's terrified cries. As dawn broke, the fog lifted to reveal a city in shock. The victim was identified as Sir Danvers Carew, a beloved member of Parliament known for his gentle demeanor and courteous nature. The brutal murder of such a respected figure sent ripples of fear through London society, turning the once bustling streets into avenues of whispered rumors and fearful glances. The police, aware of a connection between the case and Mr. Utterson through Jekyll's will, sought the lawyer's assistance. Utterson's heart sank as he led them through the winding streets to Hyde's residence in Soho. The shabby neighborhood stood in stark contrast to the wealth Hyde had inherited, a physical manifestation of the duality that seemed to define the man. They found Hyde's rooms in chaos, as if a whirlwind of violence had torn through them. Drawers hung open, their contents strewn across the floor like discarded secrets. In the grate, the acrid smell of burnt paper lingered, hinting at a hasty attempt to destroy evidence. Behind a door, partially hidden as if discarded in haste, lay the other half of the murder weapon. A broken walking stick that matched the description of the one used in the brutal attack. But of Hyde himself, there was no trace. He had vanished like smoke, leaving behind only the remnants of his violent nature, and a city gripped by fear. As news of the murder spread, London transformed. Wanted posters bearing Hyde's description plastered every street corner, his face a constant reminder of the danger lurking in the shadows. A substantial reward was offered, turning every citizen into a potential informant. The city that had once bustled with life now hummed with tension, each shadow potentially hiding the monstrous Mr. Hyde. Utterson found himself at the center of a moral storm. His knowledge of Hyde's connection to Jekyll weighed heavily on his conscience. As he paced his study, the flickering firelight casting long shadows that seemed to dance with his conflicting thoughts, he grappled with his loyalties. On one side stood his duty to the law and justice for Sir Danvers. On the other, his unwavering friendship with Jekyll and the fear of what revealing the truth might do to his friend's reputation. The lawyer's mind raced with possibilities, each more dire than the last. Was Jekyll in danger from his association with this murderer? Or was there something even darker at play, something that Utterson's rational mind refused to contemplate? As the clock ticked relentlessly onward, Utterson found himself torn between his duty to the law and his loyalty to his friend. The weight of his decision pressed down on him, as heavy as the fog that had shrouded the city on that fateful night. With each passing moment, the urgency to act grew, but so did the potential consequences of his choice. Utterson stood at his window, staring out at the city now gripped by fear. The brutal murder of Sir Danvers Carew weighed heavily on his mind, a constant reminder of the darkness that had been unleashed. As he contemplated his next move, a letter arrived, its contents promising to shed light on the mystery. But at what cost? The brutal murder of Sir Danvers Carew weighed heavily on Mr. Utterson's mind. Driven by concern for his friend's well-being and potential involvement with the fugitive Hyde, the lawyer found himself compelled to visit Dr. Jekyll. London's streets were shrouded in a thick, oppressive fog as Utterson made his way to Jekyll's residence. The mist clung to his coat, cold and damp, mirroring the unease that had settled in his stomach. The rhythmic tapping of his cane on the cobblestones echoed in the eerie silence, broken only by the occasional distant bark of a dog or the rattle of a passing carriage. As Jekyll's house loomed before him, Utterson's heart quickened. The windows were dark, like hollow eyes staring out into the night. He hesitated at the door, his hand poised to knock, as a shiver ran down his spine. What would he find inside? The image of a haggard, tormented Jekyll flashed through his mind. The door creaked open, and Utterson's jaw nearly dropped. There stood Jekyll, but not as he had expected. Gone was the haunted look that had plagued his friend for months. Instead, Jekyll's face glowed with an almost unnatural vitality, his eyes bright and clear, like polished gemstones. "My dear Utterson," Jekyll's voice rang out, warm and welcoming. "Do come in. I've been hoping you'd call." Utterson followed Jekyll into his study, his bewilderment growing with each step. The room, once a reflection of Jekyll's troubled state, now exuded an air of calm and order. Books neatly lined the shelves, papers were stacked with precision, and a cheery fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "I have news, Utterson," Jekyll began, his tone light yet tinged with a hint of solemnity. "I've received a letter from Hyde." Utterson leaned forward, his interest piqued. The leather of his chair creaked beneath him as Jekyll continued, explaining that Hyde had bid farewell, assuring his safe escape from the law's reach. As Jekyll spoke, Utterson studied his friend's face, searching for any sign of deception or distress. He found none, which unsettled him even more. "But that's not all," Jekyll said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I've made a decision, Utterson. A vow, if you will." Jekyll's eyes met Utterson's, and in them the lawyer saw a fierce determination that sent a chill down his spine. "I swear to you, here and now, that I have severed all ties with Edward Hyde. Never again will I see him or have any dealings with him." The weight of Jekyll's words hung in the air between them, heavy as lead. Utterson felt a mix of relief and skepticism wash over him. Could it truly be this simple? The sudden transformation seemed too good to be true, like a mirage in a desert. As if sensing Utterson's doubts, Jekyll produced the letter from Hyde. "See for yourself," he said, handing it over. Utterson's keen eyes scanned the page, taking in every loop and curve of the handwriting. His blood ran cold as he noticed an uncanny similarity to Jekyll's own hand. The observation sent his mind reeling with new questions and suspicions, but he held his tongue, not wishing to shatter the fragile peace that seemed to have settled over his friend. Jekyll, oblivious to Utterson's internal struggle, continued to speak. His words painted a picture of rebirth and renewal, of dinner parties and charitable works resumed. He spoke of the future with an enthusiasm that was both infectious and slightly unsettling, like a fever dream. "It's as if a great weight has been lifted from my shoulders," Jekyll said, his smile wide and genuine. "I feel like myself again, Utterson. Will you help me? Help me return to the life I once knew?" Utterson nodded, unable to refuse in the face of such earnest pleading. Yet as he left Jekyll's house that day, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The convenient timing of Hyde's disappearance, the eerily similar handwriting, and Jekyll's dramatic transformation all swirled in his mind like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. As he walked home through the fog-shrouded streets of London, Utterson resolved to keep a watchful eye on his friend. The mist seemed to close in around him, thick and suffocating, much like the mystery that enveloped Jekyll. He hoped against hope that Jekyll's promise marked the end of this strange affair, but a nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered that the mystery was far from solved. With each step, Utterson felt the weight of his responsibility grow, knowing that his vigilance might be all that stood between Jekyll and whatever dark forces still lurked in the shadows. The city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next act in this peculiar drama to unfold. As Utterson reached his own doorstep, a sudden gust of wind cut through the fog, revealing a shadowy figure at the end of the street. For a heart-stopping moment, he thought he saw the hunched silhouette of Hyde, but as quickly as it appeared, the figure vanished, swallowed by the mist. Utterson blinked, unsure if his eyes had deceived him. Was Hyde truly gone, or was this just the beginning of a more sinister game? Life in London seemed to return to normal following Hyde's disappearance. The bustling streets and crowded markets resumed their usual rhythm, as if the city had collectively exhaled a sigh of relief. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, a subtle undercurrent of unease persisted, like a barely perceptible tremor in the earth. Utterson couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. His keen lawyer's eye noticed a marked change in Dr. Hasty Lanyon's behavior. The once jovial and robust man now appeared a shadow of his former self, his face ashen and drawn, eyes haunted by an unseen specter. One gloomy afternoon, concern for his old friend drove Utterson to pay Lanyon a visit. As he approached Lanyon's home, a sense of foreboding settled over him like a heavy fog. The house, once warm and inviting, now loomed before him, its windows dark and uninviting, as if it too had fallen ill. The door creaked open, and Lanyon's gaunt figure emerged from the shadows. Utterson's breath caught in his throat. It was as if time had accelerated for Lanyon alone. His hair had turned white as snow, his skin sallow and hanging loosely on his frame. He looked like a man who had gazed into the abyss and never fully returned. "My dear Lanyon," Utterson said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what has happened to you?" Lanyon's eyes, once bright with curiosity, now held a mixture of fear and awe. His voice trembled like autumn leaves in a bitter wind as he spoke. "Utterson, I've had a shock that has shaken the very foundations of my beliefs, my understanding of the world." They retreated to Lanyon's study, a room that seemed to have aged along with its owner. Books lay scattered, their spines cracked and pages yellowed, as if they too had been drained of life. The air hung thick with unspoken tension, heavy with the weight of secrets. Lanyon sank into his chair, his movements those of a man far beyond his years. "I am a dying man, Utterson," he said, each word seeming to cost him dearly. "What I've seen, what I've experienced, it has altered everything." Utterson leaned forward, his heart racing. "Can you tell me more, Lanyon? What has caused this drastic change?" At the mention of Dr. Jekyll's name, Lanyon visibly recoiled, as if struck by an invisible force. His face contorted with a mixture of fear and hatred, the lines deepening like cracks in dried earth. "Do not speak of him!" Lanyon cried, his voice cracking like thin ice. "Jekyll is dead to me. I wish never to hear his name again." The room seemed to darken, the shadows lengthening as Lanyon's words hung in the air like a curse. Utterson, stunned by the outburst, felt a chill run down his spine. He decided it best to change the subject, but the seed of dread had already been planted in his mind. In the days that followed, Lanyon's condition deteriorated rapidly, as if whatever secret he held was consuming him from within. His flesh seemed to melt away, his eyes sinking deeper into their sockets. Within a fortnight, death claimed him, leaving behind more questions than answers. Before his passing, Lanyon entrusted Utterson with a sealed envelope. His skeletal hand trembled as he pressed it into Utterson's palm. "Do not open it," he instructed, his voice barely above a whisper, "until after Jekyll's death or disappearance. It contains the full account of the event that led to my decline." Utterson, honoring his friend's last wish, locked the letter away in his safe. Yet the weight of the mystery it represented pressed upon his mind like a physical burden, a constant whisper in the back of his thoughts. As London continued its bustling rhythm, oblivious to the darkness that had claimed one of its sons, a glimmer of hope emerged. Jekyll briefly surfaced from his seclusion, like a diver coming up for air. He hosted dinner parties, his laughter once again echoing through the halls of his home. Utterson felt a wave of relief wash over him, hoping that whatever dark cloud had hung over his friend was finally dissipating. But this period of normalcy was as fleeting as a summer storm. Within weeks, Jekyll retreated once more into his self-imposed isolation. The doors of his laboratory remained firmly shut, with only hastily scribbled notes passed underneath, serving as proof of life within. The brief respite only served to heighten the contrast of Jekyll's withdrawal, making it all the more unsettling. Utterson found himself standing outside Jekyll's home more often than not, staring up at the darkened windows. The sudden relapse into seclusion reignited his concerns, leaving him to wonder about the contents of Lanyon's letter and the true nature of Jekyll's troubles. The house stood silent and imposing, its secrets locked away behind thick walls and heavy curtains. As the night fell over London, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets, Utterson couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the precipice of a dark and terrible truth. The gas lamps flickered to life, their weak light barely penetrating the growing darkness. The mystery of Jekyll and Hyde, it seemed, was far from over. With each passing day, Dr. Jekyll's withdrawal from society became increasingly pronounced. The once vibrant scientist seemed to be fading away, like a photograph left too long in the sun. Utterson's worry grew, a gnawing sensation in the pit of his stomach. What terrible secret could drive a man to such extremes? As he turned to leave, a sudden movement caught his eye, a silhouette in an upstairs window, distorted and hunched. For a brief moment, Utterson thought he saw a face pressed against the glass, a face that was both familiar and terrifyingly strange. But in the blink of an eye, it was gone, leaving him to wonder if it had been real or merely a trick of the fading light. Dr. Jekyll's withdrawal from society became increasingly pronounced. His sudden reclusiveness caused great concern among his friends and household staff. The once bustling mansion, a beacon of scientific curiosity and social gatherings, now stood silent as a tomb. The air inside grew stale and heavy, thick with unspoken fears and whispered suspicions. Days melted into weeks, each passing hour marked only by the distant clink of glassware from the laboratory, a sound that echoed through the empty corridors like a ghostly reminder of the man who once filled these rooms with life. Utterson, the steadfast lawyer and Jekyll's closest confidant, found himself rebuffed at every turn. His knuckles grew sore from rapping on the unyielding oak of Jekyll's front door. Each visit met with nothing more than a hastily scribbled note declining his company. The warm friendship they had shared for years now felt as fragile as spun glass, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Inside the house, Poole, the loyal butler who had served Jekyll for decades, moved through his duties like a man walking through a nightmare. His footsteps, once brisk and purposeful, now fell hesitantly on the creaking floorboards. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret. Every unexpected sound from the laboratory sent a jolt of fear through his aging frame. One afternoon, as Poole stood outside the laboratory door, his ear pressed against the wood in a desperate attempt to glean some information about his master's well-being, a sound froze the blood in his veins. A voice, high-pitched and broken, scraped against his eardrums like nails on a chalkboard. It was nothing like the cultured tones of Dr. Jekyll he knew so well. This voice spoke of madness, of a mind unraveling at the seams. Poole stumbled away, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The strange voice was just the beginning of a descent into a world of bizarre occurrences. Poole found himself sent on increasingly urgent errands across London, hunting for specific chemicals at various pharmacies. The requests came scrawled on notes that bore Jekyll's handwriting, but a different, unfamiliar signature. With each failed attempt to procure the correct items, a note of bitter disappointment would slip under the laboratory door, the paper seeming to tremble with barely contained rage. As days passed, even the handwriting began to change. The once elegant script grew shaky and erratic, as if the writer's hand was guided by a malevolent force. Poole couldn't shake the feeling that these notes were desperate cries for help, messages in a bottle from a man drowning in his own creation. In the kitchen, the air thick with the aroma of fear and suspicion, the servants huddled together like frightened children. "Something's not right," the cook muttered, her eyes darting nervously toward the ceiling, as if expecting it to cave in at any moment. "It's like the doctor's not himself anymore." "Maybe it's not him at all," the maid suggested, her face as pale as the china she polished. What if someone's done away with the real Dr. Jekyll?" The very thought sent a collective shudder through the group. The house itself seemed to groan under the weight of their dark imaginings, the walls closing in like the sides of a coffin. As the days wore on, the atmosphere in the house became unbearable. Every creak of a floorboard, every rattle of a window in the wind, made the staff jump. Their nerves, frayed to breaking point, turned the once welcoming mansion into a prison of fear and suspicion. Poole found himself at a crossroads, his loyalty to Jekyll warring with his growing certainty that something was terribly wrong. The doctor he had served faithfully for so many years seemed to have vanished, replaced by a stranger whose very presence filled the house with dread. Unable to bear the tension any longer, and fearing for his master's safety, Poole made a decision. He would seek help from Mr. Utterson. The butler's weathered face set in grim determination as he donned his coat and hat, the fabric feeling unnaturally heavy on his shoulders. With a heavy heart and a glimmer of hope, Poole stepped out into the foggy London night. The mist clung to him like a second skin, cold and clammy, as if trying to pull him back into the house. But Poole pressed on, his destination clear. Whatever dark secrets lurked within the walls of Jekyll's laboratory, it was time to bring them into the light. As he disappeared into the swirling fog, the house seemed to exhale, settling deeper into its foundations. The night air thickened, wrapping around the mansion like a damp, ghostly shroud. In the distance, footsteps echoed off the cobblestones. Utterson's footsteps, each one bringing him closer to a truth he feared to face. The night air was thick with fog, clinging to their clothes like a damp, ghostly shroud as they hurried through the empty streets. Utterson's footsteps echoed off the cobblestones, each step bringing him closer to a truth he feared to face. The mist swirled around their ankles, as if trying to hold them back from their grim destination. As they approached Jekyll's residence, the imposing structure loomed before them, its windows dark and lifeless. Utterson couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The house seemed to watch them, its facade a mask hiding untold secrets. Upon entering, they found the other servants huddled in the hall, their faces ashen and eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken dread, pressing down on Utterson like a physical weight. He swallowed hard, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Poole led him to the laboratory door, his hand trembling as he pointed. They paused, listening intently. From within came a sound that made Utterson's blood run cold. A voice, unfamiliar and distressed, muttering and weeping. It was as if a stranger had taken residence in Jekyll's private sanctuary. "Dr. Jekyll?" Utterson called out, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Are you all right?" The response, when it came, was unintelligible and filled with anguish. It was a sound more animal than human, sending shivers down Utterson's spine. He exchanged a worried glance with Poole, the gravity of the situation settling upon him like a lead weight. "We must get in there," Utterson declared, his jaw set with determination. "Fetch an axe, Poole. We'll break down the door if we must." The sound of splintering wood filled the air as they attacked the door. With each blow, Utterson's fear grew, his mind conjuring increasingly horrific scenarios. What would they find on the other side? The door finally gave way with a sickening crack, and they stumbled into the laboratory. The scene that greeted them was like something out of a nightmare. Sprawled on the floor lay a body, small and misshapen, dressed in clothes far too large. Clothes Utterson recognized as belonging to Jekyll. The face, turned towards them in a grotesque grimace, was that of Edward Hyde. The acrid smell of bitter almonds hung in the air, mingling with the musty scent of old books and chemicals. A crushed vial lay near Hyde's outstretched hand, telling the tale of his final moments. Utterson's stomach churned at the sight, his mind reeling as he tried to make sense of the scene before him. The room was in chaos, as if a whirlwind had torn through it. Papers were strewn about, drawers left open, their contents spilling onto the floor. It was clear someone had been searching frantically for something, leaving destruction in their wake. Utterson's eyes darted around the room, seeking any sign of his friend. "Jekyll?" he called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. But there was no response, no trace of the doctor to be found. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Utterson's own ragged breathing. On the desk, a letter caught his attention. It was addressed to him in Jekyll's familiar handwriting. Beside it sat a glass containing a strange, smoky mixture. As Utterson watched, the faint odor seemed to dissipate, like a ghost fading into nothingness. Fighting to maintain his composure, Utterson turned to Poole. "Call the police," he instructed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll examine these papers." With trembling hands, he opened the envelope. To his surprise, it contained two documents. The first was a will, leaving everything to Utterson himself, a stark contrast to the earlier will favoring Hyde. The second was a note, its contents cryptic and unsettling. "Read Dr. Lanyon's letter before looking at my full statement of the case," it read. Utterson's mind reeled. The disappearance of Jekyll, the presence of Hyde's body in his friend's clothes, the mysterious documents, it was a puzzle that defied logic. As he stood in the chaotic laboratory, surrounded by the remnants of Jekyll's secret life, Utterson could only hope that the enclosed documents would shed light on this baffling mystery. His heart pounding, Utterson gathered the papers and prepared to leave. As he turned to go, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. In that moment, he could have sworn he heard a faint whisper, barely audible, calling his name. Was it Jekyll's voice, or merely a trick of his overwrought imagination? With a shudder, Utterson hurried from the room, the documents clutched tightly to his chest. Whatever secrets these papers held, he knew his life would never be the same after reading them. Utterson returned home, his hands trembling with a mix of anticipation and dread. Without hesitation, he retrieved Dr. Lanyon's letter and broke the seal, his heart pounding in his chest. The room seemed to darken as Utterson unfolded the letter, the paper rustling like dry leaves in his shaking hands. Lanyon's usually elegant script wavered on the page, each word a testament to the turmoil that had gripped its author. As Utterson read, he could almost hear Lanyon's voice, strained and haunted, whispering the extraordinary tale that had led to his rapid decline and untimely death. The story began on a night when the wind howled like a wounded beast, rattling the windows of Lanyon's study. A letter arrived, its urgency palpable in the hasty scrawl of Dr. Jekyll's handwriting. The words seemed to leap from the page, begging Lanyon to embark on a clandestine mission. Jekyll's plea bordered on frantic, imploring his friend to retrieve specific chemicals in a notebook from his laboratory. Driven by loyalty and concern, Lanyon followed the instructions to the letter. The familiar laboratory, once a sanctuary of scientific wonder, now loomed before him like a mausoleum of secrets. Shadows danced on the walls, stretching and twisting as if trying to reveal hidden truths. The air felt thick with unspoken questions as Lanyon gathered the requested items, his mind racing with possibilities he dared not voice. Back in the relative safety of his own home, Lanyon waited. The ticking of the clock grew louder with each passing moment, each second stretching into eternity. The air grew heavy, pressing down on him like an invisible weight. As midnight struck, a sound at the door made Lanyon's heart leap into his throat, the sudden noise shattering the tense silence. The figure that entered was small, almost childlike, shrouded in clothes too large for its frame. But it was the voice that sent ice through Lanyon's veins, high-pitched and broken, like shards of glass scraping against each other. This mysterious visitor moved with an eagerness that bordered on mania, hands shaking as they mixed the chemicals according to Jekyll's instructions. What happened next would be forever seared into Lanyon's memory, a sight that would haunt his dreams and shake the very foundations of his beliefs. The small figure, revealed to be Edward Hyde, a name that had become synonymous with evil in their circles, raised the concoction to his lips and drank. The transformation that followed was like watching a nightmare unfold in real time. Hyde's form twisted and contorted, bones shifting beneath skin that seemed to bubble and reform. It was as if an invisible hand was molding clay, reshaping the very essence of the man before Lanyon's disbelieving eyes. The air crackled with an otherworldly energy, and the very walls seemed to pulse with the impossible reality unfolding before him. And then, in a final shudder that seemed to ripple through the very fabric of reality, Hyde was gone. In his place stood Henry Jekyll, as familiar as the reflection in Lanyon's mirror, yet now a stranger in ways that defied comprehension. Jekyll's eyes, usually warm and full of scientific curiosity, now held a wild light that sent chills down Lanyon's spine. He spoke of things that made Lanyon's head spin, the duality of human nature, experiments to separate good from evil within the soul. But Lanyon, a man whose world was built on the solid ground of traditional scientific beliefs, felt that ground crumbling beneath his feet. The revelation that Jekyll and Hyde were one and the same, capable of physical transformation through chemical means, was a truth too terrible to bear. It was as if Lanyon had peered behind the curtain of reality and found a nightmare lurking there, grinning with sharp teeth and hungry eyes. In the days that followed, Lanyon felt himself unraveling like a poorly knitted sweater. The horror of what he had witnessed ate away at him, a cancer of the soul that no medicine could cure. His letter to Utterson ended with a warning, a plea to turn back from the precipice of knowledge that had claimed Lanyon's sanity and ultimately his life. As Utterson lowered the letter, his mind reeling from the impossible truth it contained, he felt as if he too had been transformed. The world around him seemed suddenly alien, full of shadows and secrets he had never before imagined. The true nature of Jekyll's experiments, the terrible secret that had been eating away at his friend, was finally laid bare. With trembling fingers, Utterson reached for the next envelope, Jekyll's full statement. His heart raced, a mix of dread and desperate curiosity coursing through his veins. What further horrors would this final confession reveal? What dark truths lay waiting to be uncovered? As he broke the seal, Utterson knew that the answers within would forever change his understanding of the world and of the man he thought he knew. Utterson's hands trembled as he reached for Jekyll's full statement. His heart raced with anticipation, eager to finally uncover the truth behind the mysterious events that had unfolded. The room seemed to close in around him, the air thick with tension. Shadows danced on the walls, cast by the flickering candlelight that illuminated the pages before him. As Utterson's eyes fell upon Jekyll's handwriting, the world outside faded away, and he found himself transported into the doctor's tumultuous mind. Jekyll's words painted a vivid picture of a man at war with himself. Born into wealth and privilege, he had been the golden boy, destined for greatness. But beneath the polished exterior, a storm raged. Utterson could almost feel the conflict tearing at Jekyll's soul, like two wild horses pulling a chariot in opposite directions. "I was like a man possessed," Jekyll's confession read. The words seemed to leap off the page, each one dripping with raw emotion. "The duality of human nature consumed my every waking thought. I saw it everywhere, in the faces of passers-by, in the very cobblestones of London streets. Good and evil, locked in an eternal dance within each soul." Utterson's breath caught in his throat as he imagined Jekyll, hunched over his desk, scribbling furiously by candlelight. The doctor's eyes would have been wild with the fervor of scientific discovery, his hair disheveled, his cravat askew. The once pristine laboratory had become a cave of wonders, filled with bubbling concoctions and strange apparatuses. Days blurred into nights as Jekyll pursued his obsession. The clink of glass vials and the hiss of boiling liquids became a twisted lullaby, driving him further into the depths of his experiment. With each failure, his determination only grew stronger. He was like a man scaling a treacherous mountain, always believing the summit lay just beyond the next ridge. "I knew the risks," Jekyll confessed, his words tinged with a mixture of pride and shame. "But the potential reward was too great. To separate man's higher nature from his baser instincts, it was the key to freeing humanity from the burden of guilt and shame." A chill ran down Utterson's spine as he read on. Jekyll's descent into obsession was like watching a man willingly walk into quicksand, too blinded by ambition to see the danger. The doctor's writing grew more feverish, the ink splattering across the page as if mirroring the chaos in his mind. And then, like a bolt of lightning splitting the night sky, success. Jekyll's words practically vibrated with excitement as he recounted the creation of his transformative potion. Utterson could almost taste the doctor's triumph, mixed with a hint of fear at the awesome power he had unleashed. "I held in my hands the key to unlocking a new self," Jekyll wrote, his penmanship becoming erratic. "One unfettered by the chains of morality and social expectation. With trembling fingers, I raised the glass to my lips, knowing that I stood on the precipice of a new era in human existence." As Utterson reached the end of the statement, he felt as if he had been on a whirlwind journey through the depths of a brilliant but tormented mind. His own hands shook as he set down the papers, his mind reeling with the implications of what he had read. The truth behind the mysterious events had finally been revealed, but at what cost? The candle sputtered, casting long shadows across the room. In that moment, Utterson felt a presence behind him, as if Jekyll's confession had summoned something dark and terrible. He turned slowly, half expecting to see the doctor himself standing there, ready to continue his tale. Instead, his eyes fell upon a door he hadn't noticed before. It stood slightly ajar, revealing a glimpse of a dimly lit laboratory beyond. The air seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, drawing him towards the threshold. As Utterson took a hesitant step forward, he could almost hear the echo of Jekyll's voice, urging him to witness the final act of his grand experiment. The laboratory was dimly lit, shadows dancing on the walls as Jekyll stood before his workbench. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the vial of murky liquid to his lips. The acrid smell burned his nostrils, but he steeled himself and drank deeply. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, a searing pain tore through his body. Jekyll gasped, doubling over as his bones seemed to crack and reform. His skin crawled, stretching and contracting as if alive. The agony was unlike anything he had ever experienced, a fire burning him from the inside out. When the pain finally subsided, Jekyll stumbled to the mirror, his legs unsteady beneath him. The face that stared back was not his own. Smaller, younger, with wild eyes that gleamed with a hunger he had never known. Edward Hyde had been born. In this new form, Jekyll felt an intoxicating rush of freedom. The weight of societal expectations and moral constraints fell away like shackled chains. Hyde's mind raced with wicked thoughts and forbidden desires, unrestrained by conscience or consequence. At first, Jekyll reveled in this dual existence. By day, he maintained his respectable life as the esteemed Dr. Jekyll, attending to patients and engaging in scholarly pursuits. But as night fell, a thrill of anticipation would course through him. He would retreat to his laboratory, drink the potion, and emerge as Edward Hyde. The streets of London became Hyde's playground. He prowled the foggy alleys of Soho, indulging in vices that would make even the most hardened criminal blush. The contrast between his two lives was stark. Jekyll, the butterfly emerging from its chrysalis each morning, only to transform back into the dark creature of the night. To facilitate this double life, Jekyll set up a residence for Hyde in a rundown part of Soho. The shabby rooms reeked of sin and secrecy, a far cry from Jekyll's respectable home. He arranged for Hyde to inherit his fortune, believing he had found the perfect solution to satisfy both sides of his nature. However, as weeks turned to months, Jekyll began to notice unsettling changes. The transformations once under his control started to occur spontaneously. He would wake up in Hyde's body, disoriented and terrified, with no memory of the night's events. It was as if Hyde was growing stronger, feeding on the evil deeds he committed. The turning point came on a foggy night when Sir Danvers Carew crossed paths with Hyde. In a frenzy of uncontrolled rage, Hyde struck the innocent man down with his cane. The sickening crunch of bone and the look of terror in Carew's eyes haunted Jekyll's dreams, a constant reminder of the monster he had unleashed. Horrified by what he had become, Jekyll resolved to suppress Hyde forever. With shaking hands, he tore Hyde's clothes to shreds, a desperate attempt to sever ties with his alter ego. For a time, it seemed as though Jekyll had triumphed over his dark side. He threw himself into his charitable works, seeking redemption for sins he could never confess. But the respite was short-lived. One sunny afternoon in the park, Jekyll felt a familiar tingling in his extremities. To his horror, he began to transform without the aid of the potion. Panic gripped him as he fled, barely making it home before Hyde emerged, cackling with glee at his newfound freedom. From that moment on, Jekyll's life became a desperate struggle for control. He fought against the rising tide of Hyde's influence, clinging to his identity like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. The battle raged within him, day and night, as he tried to maintain his grip on sanity and morality. As the transformations became more frequent and uncontrollable, Jekyll found himself trapped in a nightmare of his own making. The line between Jekyll and Hyde blurred, leaving him questioning which was his true self. He would catch glimpses of Hyde's face in mirrors, hear his mocking laughter in empty rooms. In his darkest moments, Jekyll contemplated ending it all. But the fear of what Hyde might do if left unchecked stayed his hand. He knew he had to find a way to stop Hyde, to undo the terrible mistake he had made. With trembling hands, Jekyll penned the final words of his confession, his mind racing with desperate plans. But even as he wrote, he felt the familiar tingling begin again. His pen clattered to the floor as his body began to contort. In the fading moments of lucidity, one terrifying thought consumed him. What if this was the last time he would ever be Jekyll? In the final pages of his confession, Jekyll laid bare his desperate attempts to control Hyde. He described a harrowing struggle against the evil persona that threatened to consume him entirely. The air in Jekyll's laboratory hung thick with the acrid smell of chemicals and the bitter tang of fear. Outside, London streets bustled with life, oblivious to the war being waged within the doctor's very soul. For a time, Jekyll managed to suppress Hyde through sheer force of will, like a man holding back a raging river with his bare hands. But Hyde was relentless, growing stronger with each passing day. Jekyll's nights became a battleground, his sleep no longer a refuge. He would awaken, heart pounding, sweat-soaked sheets twisted around him, to find himself trapped in Hyde's twisted form. The bedroom, once a place of rest, now felt like a shadowy prison of his own making. As the transformations grew more frequent, Jekyll's world began to shrink. The laboratory, once a place of excitement and discovery, became his fortress and his cage. Beakers clinked softly in the stillness, their contents glowing an eerie green in the dim light. The walls seemed to close in, whispering of madness and despair. With trembling hands, Jekyll measured out the dwindling supply of the special salt needed for his potion. Each grain was precious, a lifeline to his humanity. He worked feverishly, his mind a whirlwind of formulas and theories, desperately trying to recreate the mixture that had started it all. But success eluded him, slipping through his fingers like smoke. Poole's footsteps echoed through the empty house, a comfort and a torment. The loyal servant's worried eyes and hushed voice spoke volumes, even as he dutifully carried out his master's increasingly frantic requests for more chemicals. Jekyll could see the fear in the old man's face, a mirror of his own terror. Hyde's presence loomed larger, a shadow that threatened to engulf Jekyll entirely. Each transformation left the doctor weaker, his bones aching, his skin sallow and stretched. Meanwhile, Hyde grew stronger, like a parasite feeding on its host. Jekyll could feel his control slipping, his grip on his own identity becoming as tenuous as a spider's web in a storm. In his darkest moments, Jekyll contemplated the unthinkable. Suicide loomed as a terrible choice, yet it seemed the only way to ensure Hyde would never again walk the streets of London. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical force, the knowledge that he alone could prevent further harm crushing his spirit. As he penned his confession, Jekyll's hands shook with more than just physical weakness. Remorse and fear battled within him, each word on the page a testament to his folly and a warning to those who might follow in his footsteps. The scratch of pen on paper filled the silence, punctuated by the occasional sob or ragged breath. Jekyll knew with a certainty that chilled him to his core that when his body was discovered, it would bear Hyde's monstrous visage. This final transformation would be his legacy, a grotesque monument to the dangers of unchecked ambition and the folly of tampering with nature's laws. As he neared the end of his account, Jekyll's words took on a desperate urgency. He poured out his regret, his warnings, and his final pleas for understanding. The confession became more than just a record of events. It was the last cry of a man facing the abyss, a cautionary tale etched in ink and anguish. With his final words, Jekyll laid bare the full tragedy of his experiment. The paper before him, covered in his frantic scrawl, stood as a testament to the perils of scientific hubris and the complex, often terrifying nature of the human soul. As the pen fell from his grasp, Jekyll faced his fate, knowing that his story would serve as a stark warning to all who dared to meddle with the fundamental aspects of human nature. The laboratory fell silent, save for the soft hiss of a guttering candle. In the shadows, a figure stirred. No longer the brilliant Dr. Jekyll, but the monstrous Hyde now free to roam. The transformation was complete, the battle lost. And as London slept, unaware, a new terror prepared to stalk its streets.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.